deal with irrational people. In other words, can we predict their behavior? So if people are not rational, that means sometimes they do this, sometimes they do the different thing under the same circumstances. Then can we predict their behavior? The answer is yes. As long as the irrational behavior is systematic. So now, why people make mistakes? I.e., wrong economic decision, so that they will be worse off. So why people make the wrong decision such that they will become worse off because of their wrong decision? Now, sometimes they are not irrational. Sometimes they just make the wrong decision. One explanation for that is misperceiving the cost and benefit. So, for example, cheating. So a lot of the first-year students, when they enter university, they don't have the right concept about how serious we are in dealing with cheating. So what they would think is that in high school, you can do away with anything. You cheat, you get caught, don't worry. They give you another test until you are happy. So in university, it's not. If you're getting caught cheating, then you will get something on your transcript saying academic misconduct. The benefit is low. The cost is high. But they got the wrong idea because they came from high school. In high school, not much penalty the school would impose on students if they get caught cheating. Because after all, who cares? In high school, 4 years later you'll be gone. You go to university, you don't learn anything. It is not the high school teacher's fault. They babysit you for 4 years, and then you become the monkey on our back, not their back. And therefore, what they want to do is to push you through the system so that they don't have to deal with the problem anymore. But when students get into the university and they get the same perception about cheating, penalty, punishment, and they made a mistake, and it will be too late for them to regret. One other explanation why people make mistakes is risk aversion. In other words, over-insure. Now, for example, a safe driver with comprehensive insurance that is over-insured. Because if you are a safe driver, you won't get into an accident. You can avoid accident. Why do you want to get comprehensive? instead of just a third-party liability. But because people are risk averse, they don't want to take risks. And that's why, even though they knew they would be paying more than necessary, but just for the peace of mind, and that's why they're paying more than necessary. Another reason for that is limited information. So a lot of the times, people make decisions based on limited information available to them, and that's why they make mistakes. So, for example, you buy a stock. A lot of the times, people buying stocks or investing in the stock market, they make decisions not because they have done the homework themselves. A lot of the times, they are listening to some people talking on the radio, podcast, reading the Wall Street Journal, and reading some books. It's like how to become a millionaire, investing in the stock market. Now, to be honest, if there is a rule that you can follow to become a millionaire, why would anyone want to tell you? Well, the person who tells you how to make a million in a short time, that person is making a million by selling you that book, not by buying stocks. So if you have a way to earn money quick and successful, you will not want to share with anyone. So people want to share because they want your money, not because that method works. And most important, people make mistake is unrealistic expectation. Now, one example of that would be, remember 1 week ago in this room, how packed this room was. We had over 250 students in this room writing the test last week. And now, see how many empty seats here? Now, those who don't come to class on a regular basis, they have unrealistic expectations that they don't need to come to class and they will still do well. Now, some of them, they have friends here, so that they borrow the notes from their friends, so that they can use their time elsewhere. But look at this. This is me giving you the lecture. An average student will be getting 80% of what I say, unless you audio record what I said and you take a picture of everything I write down. Otherwise, you would be getting 80% of what I say. And if you borrow the notes from this person in the lecture, and you're getting 80% of what his notes tells you, then this person, 80%, only getting 64%. So imagine, if you have to borrow the notes, not the second hand, third hand, you 80% of the 64%, you only get 50%. So this is why, in this course, every year we have a lot of students fail. Because they have unrealistic expectations. They thought they could get away without putting in effort, without putting in time, without learning anything. They can pass this course. Well, miracles do happen, but not in my courses, unfortunately. Because we have our exam before Christmas. So Christmas present doesn't come early. All right, now let's move to chapter 10. Optimal decision. Marginal benefits marginal cost, and the shape of the demand curve. So we will be figuring out an explanation, the underlying explanation, why some demand curve is steeper, why some demand curve is flat. So this is what chapter 10 is about. That is the wrapping up of the consumer problem or consumer subject, the topic on consumer behavior. So now, suppose a consumer consumes two goods, X and Y, with given prices, PX and PY, and income, I. And now, the more consumed, the happier. So in other words, to maximize satisfaction or happiness, the consumer must spend all her income. Because spending all her income, she will be able to get the most. And the more she gets, the happier she becomes. The more she consumes, the happier she becomes. And therefore, the consumer will be spending all her income. And that gives us the starting point. Talk about consumer behavior. X and Y. So if income equals to 100, the price of X equals to 4, the price of Y equals to 5. Then we can determine the feasible consumption set. That is, how much X, how much Y this consumer is able to purchase with this information. Spending all the income on X and Y, then it must satisfy this equation. So this is the expenditure on X. The price of X times the quantity of X is the expenditure on X, and this is the expenditure on Y. So if the consumer spends all her income, the money she spends on X plus the money she spends on Y must equal to her income. And based on this assumption, the consumer will spend all her income. Then we ask, if the consumer buying only Y, then the consumer can buy a maximum of 20 units, because that is income divided by the price of Y. Spending $100 on Y only, Y is $5 each. So the consumer will be able to get the maximum of 20 units of Y. If the consumer is getting only X, then this is 25, which is the income divided by the price of X. Spending all the income on X, X is $4 per unit. The consumer will get a maximum of 25 units of X. And therefore, if we link up these 2 points, this is what we call a budget line. Anything on the budget line and inside the budget line will be what we call the feasible consumption set. The income and the prices the consumer faces will be allowing this consumer to pick anything in this consumption set. So now, spending all the income, then the consumer must be here, along this line. Because anything within the consumer will not be spending all the income. For example, if this is the point in which the consumer is buying 10 units of Y, that means the consumer spending $50 on Y. 10 units of Y, $5 each, the consumer will be spending $50. And therefore, the consumer will be buying 12.5 units of X, because that would cost the consumer another $50 to spend all her income. So this is the point. On this budget line, the consumer will be spending all her income. And if we have a point inside the budget line, like this, 5 units of X, 5 units of Y, the consumer will not be spending all her income. And based on the assumption, the more the better, the consumer will not be trying to settle at this point inside the budget line, because it has fewer X and fewer Y. So the consumer will not be as happy at this point compared to here, more X and more Y. And now, the basic stuff. Next. Marginal benefit is the benefit from consuming an additional unit. And now, we want to rename this as utility, which is satisfaction. And therefore, marginal benefit becomes marginal utility. We just rename it because in year 2, we will be using utility instead of the benefit. So, marginal utility is the same as the satisfaction from consuming an additional unit. So, for example, to consume an extra unit of X, this is what the consumer derives. This much satisfaction, what we call marginal utility of X, which is like the marginal benefit. And the cost of that extra unit of X is the price of X. Because the consumer has to pay this price to get that extra unit of X. And therefore, marginal utility of X over the price of X is the marginal benefit and the marginal cost ratio. In other words, this is the marginal utility from X per dollar spent. Because this price is the dollar value. So if we divide by this value, dollar value, then it is telling us how much marginal utility the consumer will derive from that extra unit of X per dollar spent. So, understanding this, the consumer has two goods to choose from. Then, it will be choosing between X and Y. First, what we notice is that these are diminished because they are marginal benefits. The more units you consume at the margin, the less benefit you derive. And these two are given, which is fixed. So this ratio, as the quantity of X goes up, marginal utility of X comes down. And therefore, this ratio will be falling. Same as for the Y. Increase Y, marginal utility of Y drops, then this ratio will drop. And now, knowing this background, then if we have the quantity of X and the marginal utility of X over the price of X, and the quantity of Y, marginal utility of Y over the price of Y, then this is what we see the relationship. As X goes up, marginal utility drops for X. Meanwhile, Px is fixed. Therefore, this ratio will drop. Same for Y. So if we look at X and Y separately, this is what we see in terms of benefits per dollar spent if you choose X or choose Y. And the next question is, how much X and how much Y should the person choose given the income? So if we put these two graphs together by ripping off this one for Y and put it in this way, so that we can merge the two into one graph. Flip that around. Marginal utility of Y over the price of Y, this is the quantity of Y. Going this way, then we can put these two in the same graph. So now, let's do it. So if on the left-hand side, this is the marginal utility of x over the price of x, and in this direction, this is how x will increase. So that is the same shape that we saw earlier. So if we overlap the two graphs, such that here we have the marginal utility of y over the price of y. In here, y goes in this direction. As it goes up, then this, we will have the marginal utility of y over the price of y. Now, based on what we learned in previous chapters, we know whenever two curves intersect in economics, it means something. This means something because this is where we have the optimal y and x level. Why is that? If we to the left, like this part of the graph, in this part, marginal utility of x over the price of x, the blue curve, is above the marginal utility of y over the price of y, which is the red curve. In other words, for each dollar spent on X, it is more beneficial. Because for each dollar spent, the consumer will derive more satisfaction at the margin than Y. And because of that, the consumer would increase X, because X is more beneficial per dollar spent. But for limited income, when the consumer buys more X, the money must come from Y, and therefore the consumer must be cutting back on Y. So in other words, on the left-hand side of the graph, the consumer will be getting more X, but less Y. If you look at this, you move in this direction, X is increasing in value, but Y is falling in value. The opposite is true if we are on the other side. On this side, the marginal utility of X over the price of X is less than the marginal utility of Y over the price of Y. That is, the blue line is below the red line. And therefore, per dollar spent, Y more beneficial. The consumer will want to increase Y and cut back on X, which is moving in this direction. The increase in Y, the consumer must cut back on X. Until we hit that intersection point. This intersection point, where marginal utility of X over the price of X equals to marginal utility of Y over the price of Y. In other words, no more gain by short between x and y. Why no more gain? Because you're reaching the maximum. If you reach the maximum, you cannot gain anymore because you're already reaching the max. You cannot reshuffle $1 from x to y or from y to x to improve the satisfaction. Alright? So this is something that we will be looking at in year 2. That's why this is where we start on this topic. Next. For any given income, as the price of x goes up, what would happen? Or when the price of x comes down, what would happen? In other words, when we have given income and we change the price of x, what kind of effect it will have on the consumer? So, let's look at this example. If income equal to 100, the price of x equal to 4, the price of y equal to 5. And now, if there's a drop in the price of x, such that now the price of x is only 3. The drop in the price of x in this example will trigger 2 effects. First, relatively speaking, x has become cheaper than before when compared with y. Remember, if initially the consumer is at the maximum, such that marginal utility of x over the price of x equal to the marginal utility of y over the price of y. If the consumer starts with the initial point as the maximum, the drop in the price of x will make the left-hand side higher than the right-hand side. And therefore, when this happens, what we learned in the previous graph is that the consumer will be increasing x and reducing y. This is what we call substitution effect. That is, when the price of x drops, x is now relatively cheaper than before when compared with y. So it will prompt the consumer to substitute x for y. We call that substitution effect. All right? Next. Income is given. Remember, income is 100. Price of x is 4, price of y is 5. And now the price of x is 3. And therefore, for any given income, the drop in the price of x allows given income to buy more. As if the income has increased due to the increase in purchasing power. And this is what we call the income effect. Now keep in mind, as if income has increased, income remains the same. And therefore, if the drop in the price of X triggered income effect to buy more X when income as if increases. Then X is a normal good. Remember, we measure a good whether it's normal, inferior, or income neutral when income changes. Here, as if income has changed. If the price drops, as if income has gone up, if the consumer buys more X, then X is a normal good. I.e., price of X drops, the income effect is positive. When the consumer buys more X, then this is a normal good. So, if the price of X drops, we get the same quantity of X. Therefore, we have zero income effect. Then this good must be income neutral. Because as if income has increased, but this consumer is not changing the quantity of X, therefore X must be income neutral, not responding to the as if increase in the income. And last, if the price of X drops, the consumer is buying less X when income as if increases, then X must be an inferior good. So we have three possible income effects: positive, normal good, zero, income neutral. In here, inferior, the income effect, negative income effect when the price of X drops. So when we combine the income and substitution effect, it actually explains the slope of the demand curve. Let's see how. So, first summarize. As the price unambiguous. The increase in X the income effect the increase in X if this is a normal good. No increase or decrease in X when it is income neutral. X will drop if this is an inferior good. It is the interaction between the income effect and the substitution effect, as we will demonstrate in a minute. How these two interact with each other is going to determine the slope of the demand curve. All right? So now, let's work it out. Suppose this is X, the price of X. And let's start with $4, like our example. When the price of X initial is $4, the consumer will buy this much X. And now, the price of X drops to $3. Unambiguously, the drop in the price will trigger this much substitution effect. Remember, increase in X. So now it goes up to X SE, the substitution effect. And don't forget, the change in the price of X will trigger what we call total effect, which is the sum of the substitution effect plus the income effect. So the overall change in the quantity of X when the price of X changes will be decomposed into substitution effect and income effect. We have the substitution effect figured out. Next, income effect. First, if X is a normal good, normal good, increase in X when the price of X drops. And therefore, substitution effect plus the income effect. That would be the total effect. And this would be the demand curve if X is a normal good. And then next, if X is income neutral, if X is income neutral, income effect is 0, no change in X, and therefore total effect is the same as substitution effect. Then, for income neutral good, this will be the total effect. Then the demand will look like this. So that will be the demand curve for income neutral good, which is steeper than the normal good. And now, if we have inferior goods, the drop in the price of X, the income effect, will trigger a drop in X because this is inferior. Then the income effect would actually be negative on X. In other words, it is working against the substitution effect. Then the demand curve for the inferior good will be even steeper, like this. The demand curve for the inferior good, 1. So that would be what the demand curve would look like when the price drops to 3. But this is a mildly inferior good. So this is the mildly negative income effect, going opposite to the substitution effect. And as you would imagine, if X is more inferior, this will be moving back more. The negative income effect will be larger. Larger negative income effect. And the demand curve will actually become horizontal. The demand for inferior good scenario 2, more inferior. So normal good, flatter demand, income neutral good, steeper, inferior good, mildly inferior, even steeper. More inferior, it becomes negative. And now, when we have a severely inferior good, what do we expect the demand curve to look like? It's actually positively sloped. That is opposite to the law of demand. That is, if we have a severely income inferior good, scenario 3, we have severely inferior good. The negative income effect actually dominates the positive substitution effect and driving the quantity to drop when the price drops, and we will have a positively sloped demand. And now, this is what we call a given good. A given good, the demand curve is upward sloping. it must be a severely inferior good. And now, don't mix that up with another good. The demand curve is also upward sloping. What we call the backend good, i.e. the image product. This image product is actually uber luxury. And that's why the higher the price, the more people will want to buy to show off their status. This is, for example, Louis Vuitton. The higher the price, the more people want to buy it because they can show off. They have the money to buy it. And you will notice, the higher the price, the worse the materials they use. So the more expensive ones, some of them are not even leather. They are canvas. So why people do this? Well, because they only care about the image. They don't care about the practicality of the product. So if you carry a bag with LV logo on it, and people recognize this is like $4,000 handbag, then people will look at it in a different way. And this is why this is upward sloping. Higher price, more people want to buy to improve or to show off their status, which is totally different than this. This is an inferior good. When the income effect dominates the substitution effect, the keeping good. Now it happened around 200 years ago, and this good potato. When the price of potato goes up, people actually buy more potatoes. Why? Well, because they need to fill their stomach. Back in the old days, in England, a lot of people, they were poor people. So to fill their stomach, they need to eat potatoes. And when the price of potato goes up, not enough money left to buy meat. And therefore, they cut meat out. And the money goes more to potato. And that results in more potato they buy at that time. So, something that we will go into more detail in year 2, explain why we will have a positively sloped demand curve.